Alliance Française, and we are very happy to have you all today for this milestone, our celebration of 50 years here at 1 Kildare Street. We are live on Facebook and YouTube, yeah, and the different talks, the series of talks will be recorded and for the posterity. We are here together to celebrate the rich tapestry of Franco-Irish heritage here at Alliance Française Dublin. Today we commemorate the vibrant culture and community that unites us all, and we also honor the past, the history of 1 Kildare Street. This day is the culmination of countless encounters with remarkable individuals, passionate people who in one way or another are all tied to the rich history of this building and to the Alliance Française. These connections have shaped what we are today, and it's truly a privilege to have been able to bring these people together for this moment of celebration. Each of them has played a role in strengthening the ties between our community and our shared cultural mission. Today is not just only about looking back at our history, but also about honoring the people who have contributed to it. I would like now to invite our first guests, our president, Michel Noone, and Xavier Dargueuve, cultural counselor at the French Embassy. They all play a pivotal role in strengthening cultural ties between France and Ireland, and they support, of course, Alliance Française. So we will be mixing languages, both French and English today.
On va faire comme ça.
On va faire comme ça. On choisit la langue qu'on préfère.
Absolutely.
So my first question for both of you is first to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit more about your role at the Alliance Française. Maybe Michel, can you start?
Super. Can everybody hear me okay? So yes, my name is Michel Noone, and I suppose first and most importantly is that I am the current president of the Alliance Française here in Dublin. I've been in this role since the 1st of November 2021, but actually my time or my involvement with the Alliance Française here in Dublin has been much longer than that. I've been a member of the board since March 2016, mainly involved on the governance side in terms of the governance, chairing the governance committee. And then I also have a day job, which is that I work in the public sector, and I've been working in the public sector for about 10 years. Prior to that, I had quite a long career in the private sector. So I suppose I then moved to the dark side. So lots of diversity in terms of culture and organisational culture. I have lived in both France and Australia, and obviously I'm Irish and live in Ireland now. I have, my degree originally was in anthropology, and it was always a great interview question. People would say, anthropology, what's that got to do with anything? But very interestingly, I found throughout my career that whole cultural oversight and looking at different contexts, different cultures. I call myself a bit of a corporate anthropologist in that I'm very interested in people and people's motivations and why they choose to work for particular organisations. And that's quite interesting as well in the context of the Alliance Française and the diversity of this organisation. And I suppose finally I probably should mention that I am married and I have 2 children, because without their support I wouldn't be doing half the things that I do today. And finally I took up the guitar just coming out of COVID, but I'm absolutely not playing the guitar later. But I love it. It's my kind of get my head out of all the activity and the stress and all of that. And that's me.
Thank you, Michel. What about you?
Alors, about me, so my full day job is to be the cultural counselor at the embassies. Donc en fait, je suis Xavier Darguel, je suis le conseiller culturel à l'ambassade. Donc moi, je suis diplomate de carrière et c'est la première fois que j'exerce donc la direction de ce qu'on appelle dans notre jargon un service de coopération et d'action culturelle, un fameux SCAC. Et je suis un fameux COCAC, conseiller de coopération et d'action culturelle. Et donc, ce qu'on fait à l'ambassade, en fait, au service de coopération culturelle, a 3 dimensions. On a une dimension universitaire, donc pour promouvoir les liens entre les universités françaises et irlandaises, et aujourd'hui dans le cadre des alliances d'universités européennes. On essaie aussi de promouvoir la coopération scientifique en proposant des bourses. Une deuxième grande composante qui rejoint ce que fait l'Alliance française, c'est la promotion du français. Donc nous, on fait ça dans le système éducatif irlandais, donc prochainement au primaire, dans le cadre de la nouvelle initiative Languages Connect du gouvernement irlandais, mais surtout dans le secondaire et aussi au niveau universitaire, au sein des universités irlandaises, où il y a très souvent, dans la plupart, un département de français. Et puis la troisième dimension, c'est aussi ce que fait l'Alliance, c'est une dimension culturelle, donc on coopère avec beaucoup de partenaires irlandais pour développer, alors c'est vraiment la culture française en Irlande. Dans la mesure du possible, on essaie un peu de promouvoir la culture irlandaise en France, mais c'est le travail remarquable que fait le Centre culturel irlandais de Paris avec Nora. Donc elle fait un excellent travail depuis elle aussi de très nombreuses années. Et donc ça, c'est plutôt sa mission. Et nous, notre mission, c'est vraiment de promouvoir l'éducation, la culture française. Voilà, je m'arrêterai là. Bon, j'ai pas de chat, je joue pas de guitare, mais voilà, je suis marié, je suis ravi d'être en Irlande ici. Et donc, on travaille en fait sur les coopérations, en étroite coopération avec l'Alliance, qui est un peu la vitrine. Même si c'est totalement indépendant, peut-être que j'y reviendrai, mais il y a différents statuts, c'est un peu technique, mais en fait, l'Alliance française est complètement indépendante de l'ambassade. C'est à la fois, je dirais, un peu le bras armé, le bras visible de ce que fait l'ambassade, mais c'est une institution complètement indépendante, donc de droit irlandais, qui est dirigée par Michel. Et donc, c'est ça qui est formidable, c'est qu'en fait, c'est a priori dirigé par beaucoup d'Irlandais dans le conseil d'administration, au quotidien par Fabienne, mais le board est composé essentiellement d'Irlandais. C'est très très bien parce que c'est ce pont qu'on recherche. Donc on travaille beaucoup avec l'Alliance et aussi avec le lycée français qui est un autre atout très très important du réseau diplomatique français. Voilà, je vais m'arrêter là.
Très bien. Oui, c'est important de préciser ce que c'est qu'une alliance française et ça va être une question pour toi, Michel. Qu'est-ce que c'est que le modèle Alliance française?
The model Alliance Française. So I suppose, really for me, if I think about the Alliance Française and the context in which we operate, and Xavier has just mentioned the board, and we have a board of directors here. They're quite an active board, and they cover a number of areas of expertise, and right across finance, HR, cultural expertise, education, EU. So it's quite a breadth of experience, which is something that really brings and I suppose enhances the independence of the organisation in terms of how we operate as well. And if I think about, I suppose, the vision, and I suppose my vision, Fabienne's vision, and the vision of the board itself, it's very much about evolving the needs of a kind of modern organisation to fit with Ireland, but also that much broader context across kind of the two jurisdictions or two dynamics, which are the French and Irish. And that translates for me in terms of, you know, that whole piece around, the first piece is around membership and looking at membership and, you know, the opportunities that are there in terms of the broader community and the broader communities that we serve. And, you know, there are unique experiences, there are exclusive events. It's just really looking at how we can enhance and grow that and developing those kind of connections. The other piece then is just in terms of the whole love of the language. And the teachers spoke this morning and they talked about, you know, we come to the Alliance initially, and I did this myself many years ago. I came for the love of the language, but actually it's much bigger than that. When you come for the love of the language, suddenly you discover the history, you discover the art, you discover all the lovely French cooking. So it's much, much broader than just that. It's the whole cultural context around what it is that you develop. Another area that we're very focused on is around the key audiences that we serve. And Fabienne's done a huge amount of work on this over the last couple of years because the dynamic coming out of COVID really changed. It changed for everybody. And one of the big areas is around young audiences and bringing young audiences. They're very much the voices of the future, and ensuring that, you know, they're on that journey with us. So that's been hugely important. The other piece that we've really grown and developed has been around the business context, and we have a number of events called Business Rendezvous, which have been really, really interesting, and they bring that context around the broader kind of change and that kind of more corporate focus in terms of the French language and the great connections between our two countries, between France and Ireland. So really, really interesting. And finally, I'd just say around the broader networks that we develop, whether they're into corporate entities. We do a lot of work with some of the government departments. We also do work with some corporate entities here. So there's a lot of professional expertise that comes to the table in terms of that, but a lot of collaboration and really enhancing and promoting our two cultures right across the board.
Absolument. Le modèle de l'Alliance française, c'est un modèle particulier, ancien, qui a été créé par Paris. La première Alliance française a été créée à 140 ans à Paris. Et c'est un modèle qui aujourd'hui apparaît, comme on pourrait dire, agile. C'est quelque chose de très moderne, puisque dans le monde entier, il y a 800 alliances sur les 5 continents, dans 130 pays. Et toutes ces alliances ont la particularité d'être, comme tu l'as dit, Xavier, indépendantes et d'être dirigées par des personnalités locales. Donc en Irlande, l'Alliance française est irlandaise. En Chine, où j'étais précédemment, elle est chinoise. Au Chili, elle est chilienne. Et c'est vraiment quelque chose de très particulier qui apporte une identité spéciale à toutes ces alliances. Et on partage tous la même passion pour la langue française, la culture française, les cultures francophones. Au-delà de la France, c'est vraiment la francophonie qui nous anime. Et c'est vraiment un modèle particulier qu'on a un peu de mal à expliquer, parce qu'on est lié effectivement à la France, et on va parler des relations très proches qu'on a avec l'ambassade de France, mais on est en même temps indépendant.
Ouais, peut-être que c'est peut-être le moment de préciser un petit peu la différence entre une alliance française et un institut français, parce qu'effectivement on peut largement confondre un peu les deux, et en fait c'est presque très bien qu'on confonde, très bien, parce que l'alliance française et l'institut français, le but est le même, sauf que donc autant les alliances françaises, donc il y en a 810 dans le monde, 820 dans le monde, et il y en a partout dans le monde, au fin fond de chaque ville, il y en a 5 en Irlande, hein. Ici on est dans le flagship, si je puis dire, des alliances françaises d'Irlande, mais il y en a donc effectivement à Wexford, Waterford, Kilkenny, Cork et Limerick. Voilà, avec plus ou moins des bâtiments, etc., plus ou moins bien installés. Mais donc, il y a vraiment des alliances françaises partout et toujours sur un statut associatif, donc c'est toujours une association locale. Alors en France, ça doit être une association loi 1901, ici c'est une charity, dans beaucoup de monde c'est le même statut. Donc c'est vraiment un statut associatif qui suit la loi locale. Et donc c'est du personnel local qui est dirigé par un conseil d'administration basé sur, dirigé par des volontaires comme Michel et toute l'équipe du conseil d'administration de l'Alliance ici. Et à côté, il y a le modèle de l'Institut français qui, lui, relève de l'Institut français, qui est une agence de l'État. Et donc l'Institut français, dans certains pays, en fait, est une fraction de l'ambassade. C'est-à-dire que moi, en tant que conseiller culturel, le fameux COCAC que j'ai évoqué tout à l'heure, il est aussi directeur de l'Institut français et il est aidé d'un directeur adjoint. Donc voilà, et finalement le fonctionnement serait exactement le même, sauf que c'est une fraction de l'ambassade, ça s'appelle l'Institut français, c'est un logo un peu différent, un IF en bleu, etc. Mais la finalité est la même, sauf que pour des raisons historiques, à un moment donné, je crois que c'était une dizaine d'années ou 15 ans, on a séparé, on dit ça c'est une alliance, ça va être un institut français, on a créé des instituts français pour des raisons peut-être comptables et de bâtiments, je ne sais pas très bien, mais donc aujourd'hui il y a ce double réseau, mais qui est vraiment sur des distinctions historiques qui étaient assez ténues il y a quelques années quand ça a été fondé. Et aujourd'hui, c'est un fonctionnement parallèle, mais qui, en fait, vise vraiment le même but. Et pour le public, c'est à peu près la même chose. Donc, on doit, une fois sur deux, dire l'Institut français ou l'Alliance française. Mais en fait, voilà, c'est une petite distinction subtile.
Et il n'y a pas d'Institut français en Irlande?
Il n'y en a pas d'Institut. Non, en général, on évite d'avoir, c'est l'un ou l'autre. C'est, voilà, pour les raisons historiques, c'est une institut ou une alliance. Mais effectivement, en général, c'est rare qu'il y ait les deux. Je me demande si à Lisbonne, il n'y a pas les deux. Mais enfin, voilà.
Beaucoup de pays où il y a les deux.
Les deux, ouais, c'est ça.
C'est plus simple quand c'est soit un institut.
C'est beaucoup plus simple, je pense, parce qu'ils font le même but. Et donc, c'est le millefeuille administratif français qu'on retrouve même à l'étranger. Voilà.
Absolument. Et finalement, pour résumer, un institut français ou une alliance française, c'est d'abord une école de langue, même si c'est plus qu'une école de langue, mais nous, c'est ce qu'on fait avec presque 4000 élèves à Dublin. Et on dira tout à l'heure, on est assez fiers, on l'a dit ce matin, d'être la deuxième alliance en Europe et finalement la première en dehors de Paris. Donc ça, c'est vraiment un moment historique pour nous, parce qu'on n'a jamais été deuxième en Europe, donc 4000 élèves. On est aussi un centre où on peut passer des examens. Et tout à l'heure, un de nos intervenants qui va juste nous succéder pourra en témoigner, passer le DELF, le DALF notamment, et tout un tas de certifications qui permettent de travailler en France ou de vivre dans certains pays comme le Canada. On est un centre culturel. On va peut-être en reparler aussi avec des moments importants, d'autres célébrations à venir, comme les 25 ans de notre festival littéraire franco-irlandais, le 10e anniversaire du Festival de la bande dessinée, puis beaucoup d'événements. On a 200 chaque année. On est aussi un peu dans le top du palmarès européen en matière culturelle. Et ça, c'est en grande partie grâce à Christine qui est en train de nous prendre en photo. Et puis, on est, comme voilà, c'est vraiment symbolique aujourd'hui, on est un endroit de rencontre. Et on parlait de la communauté, de faire se rencontrer les gens qui partagent les mêmes valeurs, qui partagent l'amour de la diversité culturelle, la diversité linguistique. Et c'est vraiment ça qui nous anime aujourd'hui. Qu'est-ce qui, à ton avis, Michel, a contribué au succès de l'Alliance française de Dublin et des alliances en Irlande? La francophilie en Irlande, c'est quelque chose d'important?
It's extremely important, yes. So we talk about the destination for a truly French experience, and that's really about French language, but it's also about the broader Francophonie culture. And I think what contributes hugely to the success of what we do is very much about the connections that we make. So, we have three main focuses in terms of our own strategy. The first is about the learning, so it's the bread and butter of what we do in terms of what we call the knitting. But then it's the broader cultural context, so it's all the cultural events, it's all the connections that we make with members, and that is with our partners through the embassy and a lot of work that we do. And then third is just around sustainability and sustainability of the model as we go forward and how that all works. So yeah, all hugely important, and that in turn really focuses the mind and contributes to the success of what we do.
Peut-être une petite question sur le moment qu'on célèbre aujourd'hui, les 50 ans de l'installation de l'Alliance française ici à Kildare Street. Donc ce n'est pas les 50 ans de l'Alliance française, qui est bien plus ancienne que ça, mais ce moment particulier, ce bâtiment, tu disais c'est un flagship, ouais. Qu'est-ce que ça représente pour vous?
En fait, ça représente beaucoup. En fait, effectivement, je parlais de flagship, vraiment des vaisseaux amiral, en fait, c'est ça. La vitrine, et c'est une belle vitrine, effectivement, il y a des belle vitrée, c'est un très beau bâtiment qui est emblématique, je pense que beaucoup de pays nous envient. Alors nos amis du Goethe Institut sont bien installés, l'Institut espagnol, l'Institut italien aussi, mais il n'y a pas beaucoup.
Ils seront avec nous aujourd'hui ce soir.
Pas beaucoup d'autres instituts, mais donc c'est vraiment un très très bel endroit. Et effectivement, c'est l'ancien club de Kildare, et maintenant ils ont fusionné avec le club de Trinity, donc effectivement, c'est pas par hasard qu'on est juste en face de Trinity, il y a toute une continuité. Mais c'est vrai que, effectivement, l'Alliance, alors je crois que c'était créé en 1902, enfin, c'était pas c'est la Société des Amis de la France ou du Français.
Ça va être le sujet de la première conférence.
Mais alors, je ne vais pas dévoiler la date de création de l'Alliance, mais ce qui est fascinant, c'est qu'en fait, c'est la continuité, la mission depuis 50 ans, ou même depuis plus.
Un siècle.
Oui, et la même en fait, c'est-à-dire c'est faire rayonner la culture française, donner envie d'apprendre le français, et finalement, je pense qu'il y a beaucoup d'institutions qui gardent quand même leur mission principale, mais en général, les entreprises, elles changent un peu de mission, etc., d'objectifs, elles s'adaptent au marché. Et bien nous, on ne s'adapte pas au marché parce que le marché, il est toujours là, d'envie d'apprendre le français. Et donc, à travers depuis un siècle, il y a toujours ce même objectif qui est le même. Si la forme change, alors aujourd'hui, c'est un très beau bâtiment et j'espère que ça le restera encore longtemps, mais les outils sont différents. Vos allusions à l'introduction de nouveaux cours plus orientés business. Maintenant, peut-être qu'on essaie de changer, présenter une image un peu plus moderne du français, mais ça reste le même français. Pour passer un peu de la langue classique et des grands auteurs pour lesquels on a tous eu envie d'apprendre le français, pour donner une image peut-être plus moderne du français. On pourra peut-être parler de projets un peu autour de l'intelligence artificielle, etc. Donc, ou encore de la commodalité, les cours à distance. Donc, effectivement, les moyens évoluent, mais le but des sociétés des amis du français ou de l'Alliance française, ça reste le même à travers l'histoire. C'est toujours la même mission qui n'a pas changé, finalement. C'est ça qui est assez fascinant.
Faire se rencontrer les gens, être vraiment la maison de la francophonie et des amoureux de la langue française. Michel, est-ce que tu peux nous dire quelques mots sur le programme de cet après-midi où tu veux que j'en parle? C'est moi qui vais en parler. Alors peut-être une dernière question sur le message. What message would you like to share with the community of Francophone and Francophiles and the future of Alliance Française?
The message that I would like to share is that the Alliance in the both in terms of I suppose it's a bit like looking at the journey of this building and how we prepare for the future and what we do. And for me, that is very much about our connections and how we connect and through what motives we connect as well. So hugely important. So the community that support us, we're very grateful, but we're also really recognise the contribution that makes to both our countries, and particularly in terms of promoting French and the francophonie here in Ireland.
Moi, je dirais en fait que l'alliance, c'est votre alliance en fait. C'est-à-dire qu'en fait, c'est vous qui la faites vivre. Alors, il y a les professeurs, bien sûr. Il y a le conseil d'administration, la direction, mais fondamentalement, c'est les gens que vous êtes qui s'intéressent à l'Alliance pour venir aux événements, apprendre le français, diffuser le message que l'Alliance, c'est bien situé, c'est près de l'arrêt du bus, etc. Donc, c'est vraiment vous qui faites l'Alliance de demain. Bon, vous avez fait celle j'espère qu'il y a des anciens élèves. Michel est un ancien élève. Donc, c'est vous qui avez fait l'Alliance jusqu'à aujourd'hui, mais aussi, c'est vous qui ferez l'Alliance de demain en continuant. Et puis, deuxième chose que j'aurais peut-être dire, c'est qu'il y a cette dimension de réseau. C'est-à-dire que si demain vous quittez Dublin et vous allez ailleurs, etc., vous retrouverez toujours le même esprit dans toutes les alliances françaises, donc dans les 810 et dans les instituts français. Et donc, vous pourrez retrouver cet espace de convivialité. Alors, soit pour déposer votre sac, je crois que c'est pas fait pour ça, mais bon, c'est une image. Quand on visite une ville, moi j'ai connu beaucoup de Français qui, le premier point d'entrée pour rentrer un peu dans la ville, etc., ils venaient à l'Alliance française pour se renseigner, parce qu'il y a des journées portes ouvertes, et c'est une façon de rentrer dans une communauté quand on se déplace à l'étranger. Et donc, je vous encourage, soit à venir à l'Alliance à Dublin, ou dans les 4 autres alliances d'Irlande, mais surtout emporter ce message, et quand vous voyagez, allez passer voir les alliances, ne serait-ce que pour comparer, avoir des idées, et rencontrer d'autres gens et d'autres directeurs, ou membres de la direction des alliances. C'est toujours utile, c'est toujours amusant de comparer, d'avoir des idées. Voilà.
Merci beaucoup à tous les deux. Quelques petits mots sur le déroulé de l'après-midi, ce qu'on vous a concocté avec l'équipe, et ça fait plusieurs mois qu'on y travaille et on avait hâte d'être à ce moment de célébration pour être tous ensemble. Cet après-midi, on vous a préparé donc toute une série de conférences. Il va y avoir 3 conférences. La première sur l'histoire de la diplomatie culturelle et l'histoire des alliances françaises in Ireland. La deuxième conférence sera une conférence sur notre bâtiment, l'architecture, et elle sera suivie d'une visite guidée. Donc, je crois qu'elles sont déjà complètes, mais si jamais vous n'avez pas pu vous inscrire à la visite guidée, on vous a préparé un petit guide qui vous permettra de naviguer et de visiter l'Alliance et de mieux comprendre l'histoire des 50 dernières années. Et puis on terminera avec nos prédécesseurs, les héritiers de ceux qui ont créé ce bâtiment, donc à l'époque le Kildare Street Club, et aujourd'hui Kildare Street and University Club. Et puis en point culminant, on aura un moment musical avec la chorale de l'Alliance française. Et puis pendant les moments de pause, ce sera l'occasion d'aller visiter les différentes salles de l'Alliance française, dans lesquelles vous allez pouvoir faire des photos, participer à des jeux, il y a des expositions, qu'est-ce qu'il y a encore ? Des vidéos sur l'année 1974, donc vous replongez dans l'époque, il y a 50 ans. On a également un magazine de l'époque. On n'a pas cité Jacques Chirac, qui, il y a 50 ans, en novembre 1974, à l'époque, il était Premier ministre. Et c'est lui qui est venu inaugurer formellement l'Alliance française. Donc on a des images d'époque qui vous attendent au 2e et au 3e étage. Et tout l'après-midi, Michel parlait de la gastronomie française. Si vous avez envie de prendre un petit verre de vin français et de déguster du fromage français, ce sera dans notre salle au rez-de-chaussée. Voilà, on vous a concocté un bel après-midi. Merci beaucoup à tous les deux.
Merci.
Je vais maintenant passer la parole à notre premier speaker. C'est un grand plaisir d'accueillir Brendan Sadlier. Brendan is a close friend, a former school principal from Belfast, who in retirement has pursued his interest in the French language and Franco-Irish cultural history. As I mentioned before, Brendan is a proud graduate of Alliance Française Dublin. He graduated in DALF C1. And Brendan is currently pursuing a PhD at Queen's University on the history of Alliance Française on the island of Ireland. Thank you very much, Brendan, for being here today.
Bonjour. C'est un grand plaisir d'être avec vous cet après-midi. Je vais donner ma conférence en anglais. So my talk today focuses on the journey to Kildare Street rather than the journey since we've been here at Kildare Street, because it's something that really hasn't been written down at all. I've had to dig and dig here and there, and it's been very interesting, and it's ongoing. So it began a long time ago, and had a number of starts and stops, twists and turns, and helping hands along the way to get to 1 Kildare Street. C'était une route longue et sinueuse. Oh. Petit problème, je vais utiliser ceci. Oh. It's always a good idea to switch these things on. Let's see. Voilà, okay. So I'm going to first transport you back 50 years to 1974 and the events surrounding the official inauguration of this grand building as the new home of the Alliance Française Dublin. So we'll then travel back briefly for context to 1883 and the founding of the Alliance Française in Paris, and then consider the first Irish links with the organisation just a few years later, before navigating the long and winding road through the establishment of the first committee in Ireland, here in Dublin in 1907, and its demise with the coming of the First World War. The emergence of the Dublin French Society, the return of the Alliance Française network to Ireland in the form of Cercle Français, the role of the French Cultural Centre, the restructuring required to form the new Alliance Française Dublin, and then full circle back to 1974 again to consider some of the transitions associated with the move here to 1 Kildare Street. The themes examined along the way include teaching, cultural impact, and diplomacy. I'll also single out a certain individual who I think deserves to be remembered, but more about her later. Along the way, we will meet fascinating people and hear of events and stories relating largely to Dublin, since this is its special anniversary, but also acknowledging the development of other committees around the island, which have contributed very significantly to the close bonds that exist today between France and Ireland, and of which as Francophones or Francophones, we are rightly proud. So I'm doing a PhD, and it's ongoing. I'm doing it part-time, so I have several more years left on the clock. But this journey has been very interesting for me as a retired teacher. This is really my focus now, and it's taken me to the Fondation des Alliances Françaises in Paris, the French Diplomatic Archives, the Bibliothèque Nationale, all in Paris, as well as the National Library of Ireland next door, and other libraries and archives on this island and in London. An extensive use has also been made of online resources such as the press and academic publications. Despite all of this, there are gaps in the research jigsaw, which some of you, I hope, might be able to help me fill in, and I would very much welcome that at the end of my talk or at a later date. So, let's go back to 1974. I'm just going to set the context for you, because unfortunately, there wasn't a lot of good news in 1974. Perhaps you can identify some of the events of the year from these images. I was just in the National Gallery, and this is the theft from the Bite collection at Rusborough House in County Wicklow. And I noticed there's a Bite wing in the National Gallery. And back in 1974, it was valued at £8 million. For the Dubliners, the 65-day strike from May to July, the UVF bombings in Dublin and Monaghan on the 17th of May caused the deaths of 35 people. One of the car bombs exploded just around the corner here in Leinster Street South, and fortunately none of the staff or students were harmed. In August, US President Richard Nixon resigned following the Watergate scandal, and early in November, Power's Court was destroyed by fire. And 1974 also saw the deaths of two presidents whilst in office. Coincidentally, Mr. Georges Pompidou of France in April, and Mr. Erskine Childers of Ireland in November. On a lighter note, there was some lighter news. Charles de Gaulle Airport opened in March in Paris. ABBA won the Eurovision Song Contest with Waterloo. And in October, Muhammad Ali knocked out George Foreman in the Rumble in the Jungle in what was then Zaire. Although, as my wife pointed out to me, Ali looks as if he's in a bit of bother here. However, from our perspective, the happiest occurrence of 1974 was the relocation of the Alliance Française Dublin from 18 Herbert Street to this historic building. Having opened at the beginning of the year for the new term on the 20th of January, it was officially inaugurated on the 15th of November by Prime Minister of France, Mr. Jacques Chirac, who was accompanied in this photograph by Dr. Gareth Fitzgerald, the Minister for Foreign Affairs. And I'll concentrate on this this event for the moment. In addition to the Alliance Française Dublin, 1 Kildare Street, leased at the time by the French government, also housed the General Delegation of the Alliance Française in Ireland, since of course there were and are Alliance Française committees, as you've heard, elsewhere in Ireland, currently Limerick, Cork, Waterford, Wexford and Kilkenny. Also accommodated here was the Cultural Service of the French Embassy. This image, as Fabienne mentioned, and the next few slides are from a high-quality magazine called Contacts that was published for 12 years by the Alliance Française in Ireland and the Association des Français d'Irlande from February 1974 until the autumn of 1986. Here we see the Prime Minister arriving at the Alliance Française on Friday afternoon and being greeted by dignitaries including the French Ambassador to Ireland, Monsieur Emmanuel Darcourt, the then President of the Alliance Française, Dr. T.K. Whitaker, and members of the diplomatic and teaching staff. In total, there were 200 guests, including the presidents of the 9 Alliance Française centres in Ireland, the ambassadors of other countries, and the directors of foreign cultural centres. On his tour of the facility, the Prime Minister also met some of the students learning French at the Alliance before formally inaugurating the building, accompanied by Dr. Fitzgerald and his counterpart, the French Foreign Minister, Monsieur Jean Sauvignargues. The speeches and a report of the proceedings were published in Contacts magazine. This was the first time that a French Prime Minister had ever officially visited Ireland. And it was of great importance in the Alliance Française context, but also because France was about to cede presidency of the European Economic Community to Ireland in January 1975. So there were important matters to discuss politically as well. And it must be remembered that Ireland had only become a formal member of the EEC in January 1973. I won't go into the details of the speeches, but just mention a few aspects. The Prime Minister spoke first, followed by a message read on his behalf by the Secretary General of the Alliance Française, Monsieur Marc Blancpain, who was unable to attend personally. Speeches were all in French, including the reply by Dr. Fitzgerald, a fluent speaker. They were full of warmth regarding the Franco-Irish relationship, past, present and future, as well as praise for all those involved with the Alliance Française Dublin. Monsieur Chirac referred to this illustrious building, ce bâtiment illustre, and the great importance of this house, the former seat of the prestigious Kildare Street Club, signifying a convergence of effort to understand each other and, as he said, enrich our two peoples, resolutely engaged in the conquest of tomorrow. Monsieur Blancpain recalled his visits to Ireland and those of his sons, his friendship with past and present staff at the Alliance, and his recollection of a wonderful meeting that he had with President de Valera. He described one Kildare Street as a home worthy of the Alliance Française present efforts and ambitions. And he closed his remarks with congratulations and best wishes, addressing his audience as "my dear friends." Having arrived in Ireland the previous day, Monsieur Chirac and his party departed, flying back to Paris that evening. And at the Alliance Française, the soirée concluded with a lecture on Impressionism by the curator of the Musée des Jeux de Paume. The inauguration was reported widely in the press as part of the overall visit by Monsieur Chirac. Pressing EEC issues included Ireland's threat to veto an upcoming summit over its demand for a regional fund. Ireland was not very rich at that time and was struggling financially. These headlines give a flavour of the reporting. You'll notice that the announcement of an official visit by the Irish President to Paris in the new year. But sadly, having met Monsieur Chirac at Arseneuchterron just a few days earlier, Erskine Childers died on the 17th of November. The National Day of Mourning was marked by the closure of the Alliance Française. Now, let's go back further into the mists of time. 1883 and the founding of the Alliance Française in Paris. The Alliance was created by a group of French patriots and philanthropists, including the future French ambassador to London, Paul Cambon, the developer of the Suez Canal, Ferdinand de Lesseps, microbiologist Louis Pasteur, and author Jules Verne. And they wished to develop French language and culture in the colonies primarily, but also beyond, in part to re-establish France on the world stage after the defeat during the Franco-Prussian War of 1870. And whilst officially a private organisation, it was recognised as having public utility and garnered government approval and support. The civilising effect of the French language and culture, la mission civilisatrice, was a popular colonial concept at the time, in hopes of winning over the indigenous peoples and generating allegiance to France. However, by the dawn of the 20th century, this assimilation motivation had lessened within the Alliance Française, despite continuing colonial competition between France and Britain, as well as Germany, Russia, Japan, Spain, Italy, and others. I have this image appears on this medal, and these medals were very popular back in the day, and this one was from 1905, and to Monsieur Duhamel. I don't know much about it. I bought it on the internet, but it's the exact same image, and it appears on some of the documentation you'll see later. It's a very colonial image, as you can see, with Mother France dispensing her wisdom and looking after her children. So let's consider where Ireland first encounters the Alliance Française. Prior to the 6th of December 1922, as you will know, this place was part of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland. And early Alliance Française activity centred around French teachers. The first mention of Ireland in the Alliance Française quarterly publication, known as the Bulletin de l'Alliance Française, came in 1892 in a report about a French university delegation being received by the Professeur de Français en Irlande as part of the celebrations of this university just across the road, the tricentenary of the University of Dublin, more commonly known now as Trinity College. Now, this is interesting. Conversely, in 1896, whilst in France, Irish Republican Maud Gonne was approached by the Alliance Française in eastern France to speak about relations between Ireland and England. So it was going to be very one-sided. So her lectures, in which she railed against British rule, were reportedly received sympathetically and applauded by her audiences. Now, the Alliance Française might not have been here in those days, but students from Ireland regularly appeared in the bulletin's list of attendees at the Alliance Française summer schools in Paris. Among the first were teachers William Johnson from Belfast and Alice Fraser from Dublin. And you can see other examples on the slide on the left there. Of course, successful students were keen to use their credentials, as in this newspaper advertisement for Upland High School for Girls. And you can see there is a Miss Twig BA certificated by Cambridge Training College and by the Alliance Française in Paris. It's also noteworthy that in the 1920s, Irish religious sisters began appearing on the Paris lists, presumably in connection with their teaching roles. So, for example, sisters Catherine Gorey, Hannah Hurley, and Lily McDermott, all from Dublin, in 1924. Now, the earliest Alliance Française branch on the island of Ireland, as confirmed in the French press, the Irish press, and the Bulletin de l'Alliance Française, was via a committee founded in Dublin in 1907. And this may come as a surprise to many in the room, but bear with me and I'll explain. The formation was at the behest of the French consul, Hyacinthe Lefebvre-Mayol, and it was proving very successful, featuring high society Anglo-Irish figures such as Lady Aberdeen, the wife of the Lord Lieutenant of Ireland, and Professor John Penton Mahaffey of Trinity College. It's as yet unclear if this was in any way connected to the Irish International Exhibition in Dublin that year, which ran from May until November, given that 284 French companies were exhibiting. At this time, the Dublin branch, situated, of course, in the British Empire, was affiliated to the British Federation of Alliance Française, which was formed in 1906. And this umbrella group reflected the need for tighter management of the proliferation of, in England, Scotland, and Wales, of Alliance Française branches and affiliated groups such as Société Française and Cercle Français. So this was an explosion of interest in French language and culture across the British Isles. The inaugural event was a lecture on the position of French literature in the world by Professor Amédée Salmon of the University of London, and it was held on the 20th of April 1907 at the RDS, the Royal Dublin Society, then located actually just up the street in none other than Leinster House, and it was reported widely in Irish newspapers. You might see here Professor Mahaffey and Dr. Douglas Hyde. This relates to the examining of French within the school system here. Basically, there was no oral aspect at all to the exams, and they were entirely based on reading and writing. And in his introduction to the lecture, Professor Mahaffey stated that the Alliance Française placed great importance on practical conversational French, especially with educated Frenchmen, particularly those who would come to talk at the Alliance Française events. Dr. Hyde, later the first president of the Free State, was a founder of the Gaelic League, and he didn't see eye to eye with Professor Mahaffey on a number of language issues, especially the value of Irish, which the professor had described as containing, and I quote, "no literature that was not religious, immoral, or indecent." So whilst there was clearly no love lost between the pair, they did agree on one thing: the importance of developing French-speaking skills. This is the detailed account of the inaugural lecture, which appeared in the Irish Times. And this is from the Bulletin de l'Alliance Française. You can see that image again. The large attendance, including French expats and the Alliance Française patroness, Lady Aberdeen, heard an introduction by the chairman, Professor Mahaffey, in which he spoke of the Alliance Française as a great organisation promoting the language and literature of France and the warm relationships which had existed between Ireland and France for centuries. Membership of the Alliance Française, it should be noted, from its inception in 1883, was open to all, regardless of religion, political persuasion, ideology, or occupation, so long as they were committed to spreading French influence. So, and therefore in Dublin, it's unlikely to have been confined to Anglo-Irish Protestants. Indeed, one of its early vice presidents was a Catholic bishop, Nicholas Donnelly. Of the committee in 1908-9, 4 of the 11 officers were female, and indeed aristocratic women, Lady Aberdeen, and vice presidents, Ladies Weldon, MacDonald, and Ardelon. The other vice presidents were Sir John Gardner-Nutting, and Lord Grenfell, who was the Commander-in-Chief of the British Army in Ireland, as well as the Bishop. From the dates given in press coverage, it seems that this aristocratic character might have been reflected in the annual periodicity of the Alliance Française events, mostly taking place between October and April, perhaps acknowledging that in and around the summer months, members would be absent from Dublin for the London season of elite social events such as grand balls, sporting occasions, and festivals. This is the list of the committee from the Bulletin de l'Alliance Française in 1908. A significant event for the nascent Alliance Française Dublin was a lecture about the French peasant farmer given by René Bassin, a member of the Académie Française, on the 10th of December 1908. As part of his tour of branches in the British Isles, signalled in the press 2 months earlier and in the Bulletin de l'Alliance Française, the visit was solicited by the consul, Monsieur Lefebvre-Maillot, once again emphasising the Alliance Française close links with the diplomatic mission. It was expected that this great level of interest augured well for the formation of Alliance Française branches on other cities on the island. I don't know whether anybody recognises this. I think it's actually changed today. This is shop. But the drive for growth and expansion was evident from the outset. A further example being the enticement that members could buy from a selection of French books purchased by the Alliance Française Committee and all on sale at the bookshop of Hannah and Neil at 18 Nassau Street. And it should also be noted that just after this, the Alliance Française in Paris voted 100 francs to the Dublin Committee to purchase books for its library. Now, unfortunately, at present, I have not been able to find the minute books of the Alliance Française Dublin of that early period. However, there is a press report of Lady Aberdeen being present for an afternoon meeting in the Shelbourne Hotel in 1911. Whilst there's mention of a federation providing greater resources to the branches, it seems that at that stage the Alliance Française Dublin didn't have any teaching function. At the end of 1913, there was a change from the usual literary and historical topics, with excitement about a lecture of exceptional interest by Colonel Paul Renard of the Paris School of Aeronautics on the subject of aviation, using the latest technology, images in the form of lantern slides. And the final event of the season in March 1914 was a presentation about adventures in Morocco, and it was followed by an elegant soiree for which the ladies' fashions were detailed in the Irish Times. It's poignant that this was such a happy occasion, given the turbulent times that were about to unfold in the world and in Ireland. It's surprising that the outbreak of World War I appears to have brought all Alliance Française activity in Dublin to a halt. Not only that, but for reasons that remain unclear, the Dublin link with the Alliance Française appears to have been broken until 1950. And it was only in 1960 that an official Alliance Française returned to the city. You can surmise that the impact of World War I, the 1916 Rising, War of Independence, Partition, Civil War, and the quest for international recognition of the new Free State may have been determining factors against the re-establishment in Dublin, at least in the short term. However, this was far from the end of the French linguistic and cultural influence in the capital. With the support and encouragement of the French consul and a great supporter of Ireland, Monsieur Alfred Blanche, the Dublin French Society was established in December 1922, just a few days after the Irish Free State came into being. Fortunately, miraculously, the minute books are preserved in the National Library of Ireland. And I'll just give you a brief flavour of its endeavours before explaining its role as a precursor to the new Alliance Française in Dublin in 1960. So the Dublin French Society was organised in a similar fashion to an Alliance Française branch, with a committee, constitution, rules, and it welcomed anybody who had a sound knowledge of French and a keen interest in the language. The committee met originally at the high school, 40 Harcourt Street, and held regular cultural events and lectures, usually with advance notice in the press and in a programme such as the one shown here. Now in the Free State, the membership did not have the old aristocratic overtones, yet included distinguished figures throughout its existence, including from the outset this man, Professor Sir Robert Tate of Trinity College, who was its first president, and a certain W.B. Yeats in 1931. Before I go further with the Dublin French Society story, I just need to explain something about the Alliance Française network in Ireland. As mentioned earlier, towards the end of the Second World War, the Alliance Française was formally active in Ireland again, in the form of affiliated Cercle Français, working closely with French diplomats and the Alliance Française in Paris through a délégué général, or a general delegate, based in Ireland, who coordinated activities, most notably Monsieur le Dilicoq. These arose firstly in Limerick in 1944, and then Waterford, Cork, Kilkenny and Wexford. And some of these would develop associated teaching functions, and all would become fully accredited Alliance Française branches from the late 1960s. They each have a distinguished history, and I hope that they will permit me to make contact in the next phase of my research to learn more and perhaps be of some assistance through my work. I must also acknowledge that for a time there were Cercle Français in Sligo, Galway, Athlone and Escorthy and Clonmel, and an Alliance Française branch in Dunleera not too long ago. Now back to the Dublin French Society. In 1950 it was suggested that much benefit would be gained by the Society in becoming affiliated with the Alliance Française network, since it appears that the Society was experiencing challenges with membership numbers. So at their AGM, bottom here in 25th of April 1951, it was recorded that formal affiliation had been granted, presumably in the late 1950s, and that this would bring many important privileges, including access to summer courses. An embassy cultural centre had been created in 1945, offering courses and lectures, but this was replaced in 1952 by a new French cultural centre at 18 Herbert Street. And this was inaugurated by the ambassador, Monsieur Lucien Félix, on the 2nd of October. It was reported that the rooms in the new French Cultural Centre will be available to the committee and subcommittee of the Alliance Française Dublin, the committee and subcommittees of the Dublin French Society, which for many years, and this is important, had done much to make French literature and culture known to Dubliners. Because I have to say something a little bit more negative about the Dublin French Society now. This is again, the success of the French Cultural Centre gradually depleted further the membership and numbers attending Dublin French Society events during the remainder of the decade, as evidenced by this statement from a committee meeting, and ultimately it agreed to be integrated into a new Alliance Française Dublin in 1960, despite some internal resistance. In fact, there had been considerable frustration with the Dublin French Society within the embassy and the Alliance Française network for several years, during which its subventions from the French government had gradually been reduced. And this is an example where the ambassador wrote to the Ministry for Foreign Affairs, requesting the reduction of the subvention by £10 to the Dublin French Society in order to give it to the Cercle Français of Wexford and its new annex in Enniscorthy. The Dublin French Society had basically faced an ultimatum: integrate or lose financial support and access to Alliance Française resources. So this was done in the context of the Alliance Française network in Ireland and the French government needing to be more efficient and effective in its language, teaching and cultural events, with cultural efforts. Much of this change was driven by Monsieur Pierre Schertz and his successor, Monsieur Richard Arbelot, both men occupying the unusual hybrid role of General Delegate of the Alliance Française in Ireland, overseeing all the activities, as well as being responsible for the management of the French Cultural Centre, for which they were paid by the French government. Effectively, a merger took place to create the Cultural Centre of the Alliance Française. Now, these decisions involved the French ambassador, the French Ministry for Foreign Affairs, and the Alliance Française leadership in Paris. Monsieur Schertz's predecessors appear to have been based in cities in the south of the country and regularly visited the Cercle Français. His decision to live in Dublin seems to have been in order to streamline the situation here and bring everything under the Alliance Française umbrella. Having initiated the restructuring of the French cultural and language provision, and prior to his departure in 1960, Monsieur Schertz compiled a report detailing the current situation and a way of moving forward. These suggestions included the establishment of a local Alliance Française committee to take control, and he was in favour of this happening by October 1960, writing in detail here about how that might be achieved. He also flagged up the need to either restructure 18 Herbert Street, which was in a poor state and too small, or find new premises fit for the envisaged expansion. However, on weighing up the pros and cons, it seems that the new Délégué Général, Monsieur Arbelot, who seemed to be a very, very dynamic individual, felt that he alone was best placed to drive forward the improvements rather than have a committee. He set this all out in his first annual report in June 1961, which ran to 14 pages. Okay, slight change of tone. This is the bit about the surprise individual I mentioned at the start. Having reached the 1960s, I want to take a break from all the talk about physical spaces and managerial issues, just for a few minutes to bring your attention to this special person whose association with the Alliance Française came to an end midway through the 1960s. Now the Alliance Française Dublin throughout Ireland, the Alliance Française Dublin and throughout Ireland has always been associated, as we heard earlier, over the years with certain individuals of great distinction in their fields and with people who have shown great dedication to it and to its mission. Whether French, Irish, or from elsewhere, they have supported, guided, and indeed staffed the Alliance Française Dublin in a period spanning 117 years, not without gaps, twists, and turns as we've seen. What I didn't mention earlier when I was talking about President Chirac's speech here 50 years ago was that he singled out for praise the contribution of a certain French teacher who I feel must not be lost to history. And her name was Mademoiselle Marie-Thérèse Giudicelli. She provides a teaching link from 1926, the Dublin French Society, the French Cultural Centre, and the Alliance Française Dublin, right through until the mid-1960s. And I'm aware that there's a room here in this building dedicated to Dr. Françoise Henry, upstairs, the eminent academic and archaeologist. And whilst Mademoiselle Giudicelli was not in this high academic league, she made a massive contribution to the teaching of French language, literature, and culture outside the school sector, particularly in the Dublin area. For a while, she organised summer courses for teachers and student teachers with Dr. Henry. Now, this is a fascinating lady. As a young woman, Marie-Thérèse was one of the first presenters at the dawn of Irish radio, which was then called 2RN. So from April 1926, just a few months after the station opened, she presented a 15-minute French lesson on Thursday nights, right through until 1935. You can see here a few of the press adverts showing her programs in the schedules. It's unclear why she stopped these lessons in 1935, although it's interesting, you can see on the right here, on the left it says French lesson, on the last advert it says story in French, so maybe change in taste, I'm not sure. Marie-Thérèse became a member of the Dublin French Society in 1926 and welcomed its members to her various classes. These classes focused on conversational French, mostly for adults, but some for children, catering for various ability levels, and were heavily advertised in the press between 1942 and 1960. You can see some examples here. She initially worked out of 19 Ely Place, and then from 1948 at one of the DBC cafes at 38 St Stephen's Green, and I had to hook around to see what DBC Cafe meant, and it means Dublin Bread Company. Okay. I got 4 cafes in Dublin at the time. From 1952, the lessons were in the French Cultural Centre, 18 Herbert Street, and she also was available for private tuition. She was clearly well respected and was also involved in the wider French community. This is the only image I have found of her. It's at the AGM of the French Benevolent Society at Jamais restaurant in 1930. The French Consul General, Monsieur Alfred Blanche, is sitting in front of her. Again, somebody I have a lot of time for. He was very, very energetic in supporting Ireland on the international stage and with France particularly. Here's just mentioned among the guests at receptions at the French legation in 1932 and 1933, and the French consulate had been upgraded to a legation in 1930. In 1945, her work was highlighted to the French Minister for Foreign Affairs, Monsieur Georges Bidault. Marie-Thérèse had written to the new head of legation in Dublin, Monsieur Jean Rivière, explaining her work and her need for additional equipment and funding to make her lessons more enjoyable and effective. She ended her letter by stating that it was her constant preoccupation to make France known and loved. Monsieur Rivière then passed this on to Paris with a cover letter praising Mademoiselle Giudicelli's work and her devotion, her efforts, and strongly supporting her request. She was the sole teacher at the French Cultural Centre and the first and only teacher in the Alliance Française Dublin when the reorganisation happened in 1960-61. For much of her time working, she was paid by the Cultural Relations section of the French Ministry for Foreign Affairs, as well as through student fees, although as the Alliance Française expanded, this student fee business caused a little bit of a problem and it had to be sorted out, which it was done amicably. So back to the Dublin French Society, unfortunately still struggling. They turned to Mademoiselle Giudicelli to encourage her students to attend its events and gain experience speaking French in a social setting. I've only come across a few references to her personal life. My research suggested that she had a long life, that she was born in 1902 in Dieppe and died in 1994 in Nantes. It's very hard to be... I've looked through the genealogical records, and this is the best fit I can get for her. Well, I'm not 100% sure. According to this feature article in An Irish Woman's Diary in the Irish Times in 1961, she enjoyed living in her adopted city of Dublin, which was, as she said, less trying than the big cities of Europe, and where there is less struggle and work can be a pleasure. I don't know whether we could all say that, but there you go. She enjoyed country walks and trying to keep up with modern French literature, commenting, "The French production of the present day is immense." Mademoiselle Giudicelli was described as one of the best-known teachers of French in Dublin, although this vocation had not been on her mind when, after graduating from university, she came to Ireland to perfect her English. However, as she started giving some French lessons, the people and the city grew on her, and her classes evolved to the extent that she's credited in this article as forming the nucleus of what would become the French Cultural Centre. She hadn't returned to live permanently in France since, but was heading home to Paris and Brittany for the summer holidays, having just been presented with the prestigious Palmes Académiques by the ambassador on behalf of the French government. The last reference I can find for Marie-Thérèse is her signature on this Alliance Française certificate from 1965. And it was awarded to Paul O'Dwyer, who sadly passed away just a few months ago. He had come across this old certificate very many years later, and he posted a photograph of it on his excellent blog, which I think is still available. He commented, "I brought a smile to my face when I looked at the signatures. Yes, there she was, Mademoiselle Giudicelli. So she had not been a figment of my imagination. A wonderful lady, a great teacher, civilization and refinement personified." So, to end my presentation, I just want to finish the saga of the formation of the Alliance Française Committee and explain why the move to 1 Kildare Street happened. So we're moving on to 1969. It was a very busy year for French diplomacy in Ireland. A new ambassador was appointed in March, Emmanuel Darcourt, who was a war hero and actually had a leg blown off during the Second World War. The private visit of President Charles de Gaulle happened following his resignation, and this was in May and June. And there was the opening of the new chancellery at number 36 Aylesbury Road, which is no longer, I don't think, used. I think it's been sold off. Opposite the French residence by the Secretary General of the French Ministry for Foreign Affairs, Monsieur Hervé Alphon. And this is an interesting link back because he was the son of the first head of legation, Monsieur Charles Alphon. So I've seen quite a few internal diplomatic reports written in connection with these events of 1969, some of which touched on the status of French language and cultural action in Ireland. There was a real passion to drive this forward. By this time, as mentioned earlier, some of the Cercle Français around the country have been upgraded to Alliance Française branches, with expanded teaching functions. Yet it was felt that these and the Alliance Française Dublin could still be much more impactful with the Irish adult population, especially since it was noted that in secondary schools, French was being studied by 87% of those taking modern languages. In other words, a very large potential membership. It was hoped that the Alliance Française Dublin would soon appoint a course director to broaden the adult audience to include professionals such as engineers and civil servants, and also to assist around the country. Yet, still, 10 years later, no Alliance Française committee has been formed. In fact, Dublin was reportedly the only Alliance Française in the world to be run by an individual who also happened to be a cultural attaché, rather than by a committee. This was clearly a matter of some embarrassment. However, it seems that the issue began to be resolved in 1970 or 71 with the appointment of Carol O'Dolly as the first president of the Alliance Française Dublin. He stepped down and becoming a judge at the European Court of Justice in Luxembourg, and he would later become the 5th president of Ireland. He was followed in 1973 in January by Dr. T.K. Whitaker, who was then the governor of the Central Bank of Ireland, and later became the Chancellor of the National University of Ireland, a role which he occupied for over 20 years. The final statutes of the Dublin Committee were adopted at the AGM on 15th of April 1975, and you can see the committee listed here. So turning finally to the reasons for the move to 1 Kildare Street. You'll remember that back in 1960, Monsieur Schertz had raised the issue of 18 Herbert Street being too small for the expanding Alliance Française, which was incorporating the former cultural centre. Work was subsequently carried out to make the basement usable for larger gatherings, but it was soon considered inadequate. Then in 1967, the embassy created a separate cultural service led by a specially appointed cultural attaché and concluded a cultural accord with the Irish government. This new service was based in 14 Fitzwilliam Place. Still requiring more space, the Alliance Française began using rooms in this building for some of its teaching activities. So students and teachers were now moving between two buildings, one on Herbert Street, one on Fitzwilliam Place, 900 metres apart. And you can see the relative position to where we are today. So, there was frustration that compared to the Germans and Italians in particular, the buildings occupied by the Alliance Française and the Service Culturel were much smaller and therefore placed limitations on the type of prestigious events that could be offered. There was talk of hiring rooms elsewhere in order to expand the cultural offerings, for example, art exhibitions, French Film Week, theatre group. Underlying all of this were complications due to the Alliance being tied and the government being tied to leases, long leases, which still had years to run. In 1970, the ambassador wrote to the French Minister for Foreign Affairs, setting out in detail the challenges involved in working out of two buildings. He stated that the landlord was now intending to sell 14 Fitzwilliam Place, thus adding pressure for a decision on a way forward. And he set out the various options. So buy the building, modify it, and have the whole of the cultural project, including the Alliance Française, working out of one building. Construct a bespoke new building, or, surprise, surprise, find a building elsewhere. So, it's clear that the move to Kildare Street was the outcome of these deliberations, and it was flagged up in the Irish Times as early as March 1973. It was described as being leased for 20 years by the French Embassy and would be used by the Alliance Française, the Cultural Service, and as ancillary embassy and general offices. Ireland's recent accession to the EEC was also seen as putting pressure on existing French office space in the city due to increased Franco-Irish cooperation. The Alliance Française began operating its classes out of 1 Kildare Street at the start of the January session in 1974, and you can see two of the many, many press adverts which indicate the transition from the old premises to the new. So finally, want to leave you with my attempt to represent the actual journey from the past to the present, specifically from 18 Herbert Street to 1 Kildare Street. So bear with me. You go down Herbert Street, you turn to St. Stephen's Church, you turn left onto Mount Street Upper, continue through the junction into Marion Square South, passing the current Alliance Française on the left and the park on the right. You turn right into Marion Square West, passing the Leinster House and the National Gallery. Left onto Clare Street, passing the National Gallery, the other entrance. And straight into Leicester Street South, and we're here at 1 Kildare Street. So, I hope you've all taken your sickness tablets. So, thank you for your attention. Hope you found something interesting. Now fasten your safety belts and prepare for takeoff. Sharp turn. Very sharp turn. There we go. Thank you very much.
What an incredible journey and remarkable work. Thank you so much.
Very well.
Wow.
It's been a pleasure.
I guess you have some questions.
Yes, yeah, superb. Really, an awful lot of work has gone into that presentation and an awful lot of work into the research. I'm partly wondering what your discipline is, which is influencing your journey through this PhD.
Right.
But that's not my question.
Okay.
If I may, I am wondering if this was your... Oh, thank you. Sorry, thank you very much. I'm wondering to what extent the gentlemen's club that was here before the Alliance influenced or informed, I suppose, half of the development of what we know today. And it's interesting the way in which you were pointing to the committee members there, all of whom were part of the aristocratic lot. Obviously, the women wouldn't have been part of the Kildare Street Club at that stage. It would only have been a men's. But I'm just wondering to what extent they spearheaded, if that is fair to their efforts at the time. You know, what aspect were they developing of the Alliance Française? And given that they wouldn't have been coming from a kind of a middle-class attitude in relation to educational development, which was, I presume, part of the cry later on for it to make it more inclusive, more democratic, etc. That certainly wouldn't have been the wish at that time, I'm presuming. So again, that's partly where I'm wondering how you bridge that gap. And I suppose, given that the French club still exists within the Kildare Street Club, albeit on St. Stephen's Green in number 17 at the moment, to what extent do you continue those links, and how is that part of it? Thank you.
I think you have to stay on for a little while to listen to Ivan and Charles, who are going to talk about the whole historical aspect of the Kildare Street Club and its links. I hadn't actually thought of maybe the role of the Kildare Street Club in influencing the development of the Alliance Française. However, I would imagine perhaps that some of the members of the committee, the Alliance, were also members of the Kildare Street Club. But I hadn't actually thought of that. Maybe the gentleman later can add something to that. But my connection, I'm a cultural historian, and I was a primary school teacher, and I retired, and I wanted to follow my passion for French, and I hadn't obviously had much time to do that when I was a teacher. So I actually, I don't know if anybody's ever seen this book. It's called Tromper l'amour by Maurice Rivière, and it's won the Prix de Quai des Orfèvres in 2015, and I happened to be in a bookshop in Paris, and I saw it, and I thought, well, that looks interesting. I scanned through it, and I saw a reference to Ireland, and I looked a bit further, and I bought the book, and I brought it home, and I read the book, and I thought, so what's this Alliance Française they're talking about? And this is about a serial killer who escapes to Ireland from France and starts serially killing in Ireland. And one of the characters in the book works here. Totally fictional. But anyway, and that's where I first came across the Alliance Française. Never heard of it before, didn't know it existed. And so I came down, and people were very friendly to me. And then, I don't know whether it was my influence or what happened, but about a month later, the author of the book, Xavier, came here to this room to talk about her book. And of course, I was asked to stand up and explain in French my connection to the book and why I was there. So that was a lovely experience. And she actually, we had a good chat, and she dedicated the book to me. So after that, I started trying to perfect my French, and I started coming down here, and I did the DELF B2, and then I worked on to the C1. I went to, did a week at the Paris-Nanterre at their rentrée courses for students who were going to be staying on. Now, I'm considerably older than all the students who were there, but that led to a semester in the University of Pau, et Pays de la Dour, where I did a course at C1 level and got a diploma. Came back here and did the C1, and then I got into Queen's, and I did a master's in looking at the French press coverage of the Irish famine, which is very interesting. So I was looking at the 19th century, and I started the PhD thinking I can expand on this and maybe look at links between the two countries at that time, but that just was a dead end, which basically stopped at the cross-channel ferry ports, because you couldn't tell who was Irish, who was, what was going on. So I then thought, what am I going to do? I'm going to have to give this PhD up. And then I thought of the Alliance Française, and I came down, I spoke to Xavier, I spoke to Fabienne, and they've been very supportive, and here you find me today. So that's my story in brief.
Many questions.
Thank you very much. That was, I agree, absolutely just so interesting and so full of great detail. And I'm delighted that you, and by the way, on my way in here from Bagot Street this morning, that's exactly the route I traveled along. But I was delighted to hear you mention on more than one occasion former President Erskine Childers, the fourth President of Ireland, and I'm sure you're aware of this, but perhaps just it may be of interest to the audience more generally, to say that whereas his three predecessors, of course, as President of Ireland, had strong connections with the Gaelic revival, President Childers looked very much towards France right throughout his life. From when he grew up in England, family holidays in Brittany, when he graduated from Trinity College in Cambridge, his first career was with Thomas Cook's, the travel agent in Paris, for a number of years in the late 20s and early 30s. And of course, when he came to marry for a second time in 1952, as a senior politician, his first wife having died, he got married in, where I got married, in the Église Saint-Joseph de Paris in Avenue Hoche in Paris. Interestingly, because I understand that he being Protestant and Rita Dudley, his second wife, being Catholic, there were certain sensitivities amongst the Catholic Church in Ireland about the idea of him being married in church in Ireland. So, and I guess he would have, he always welcomed the chance to speak French, therefore he would have particularly welcomed that courtesy call from Prime Minister Chirac, literally 2 days before he died. I think later on the day of the inauguration, on the 15th of November here, his date of death was the 17th of November. So I think Prime Minister Chirac travelled out to Oras and Uachtaráin and obviously would have learned with great shock of President Childers' death 2 days later. Anyway, that's it. Can I ask very briefly a question about the Friends Society? And Beckett and Joyce and their interest in the French language before they went to live and write and become famous in France. did they have any connection? Is it known? Did they have any connection with the French Society while they were students and young men in Dublin?
I have been unable to find anything out about the Dublin French Society other than the press reports, but also the minute books. Now, the minute books are a goldmine, and I have to say I have not gone through them exhaustively, but I had heard, I was speaking to somebody when I visited the archives at UCD, and they had something to say, W.B. Yeats was a member, and I thought, well, I'll need to verify that. So I went through the minute books looking for W.B. Yeats, and I found him. So I thought, well, this is great, you know. But there's more work to be done on that, just to see. I would be surprised if they weren't in some way connected. Yeah.
Sorry, can you hear me?
Charles.
Yes, first of all, that was a compliment you on a wonderfully researched and such an appropriate thing for us to hear on this occasion.
Thank you.
It's really wonderful. Lots of things of interest. May I ask you one question that well, we'll be coming on to it later in a sense, but who let this to the Alliance? I saw there that the Phoenix Assurance, Kildare Street Club, sold it to Phoenix Assurance in 55 or thereabouts, 54. Now, Phoenix, according to that, had sold it on, but I think it was those people who would have redeveloped this place. But who were the landlords who let it? And is it still leased, or is it freehold owned by the Alliance?
Well, it's now owned by the French government. Purchased the building, this part of the building, in 1986. Because this is actually, I don't want to step in anybody else's areas of expertise, but I learned recently that this building, if you look at it from the outside, if you saw on the slide there, it's actually three originally three houses here on this site. So, although this is called 1 Kildare Street, if you look next door, there's a door into the manuscripts reading room for the National Library, and it's 2 and 3. So the French government bought this part of the building in 1986. As regards who actually leases, I know you'll probably talk about this later, there's a lot of controversy about what was done to the building when it was revamped in the early 1970s. I don't think it was done at the behest of the Alliance Française. I think we can sort of say that we're not guilty of it, but it was redeveloped for office space. And nowadays, looking back, there's a lot of controversy about all the lovely features and the staircase that was ripped out of it. Charles, I do have some more information about that, but I cannot remember offhand. There was another company involved in, I think, restructuring it, and I'll find out for you. I'll let you know.
Merci beaucoup. Je pense que vous avez encore des questions. Maybe you have more questions, but we will have all the keynote speakers at the end of the afternoon to answer to all questions. I think now it's time to have a very small break, and we will be back with the second talk about architecture and how it was transformed during the 60s and 70s. So we'll meet soon in 10 minutes? 15 minutes. Merci beaucoup.
Merci.
Bravo.
I have some cards, some carte de visite, if anybody would like to take one and perhaps contact me. I'd be happy to speak to you.
Was my first.
See, this is what I wanted to hear.
it was in 80.